All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for being here to celebrate the Centennial of the Legion of Honor. I can't think of a better way to do it than to go from cake outside to a wonderful lecture here in the Gun Theatre. I'm particularly excited about the lecture this afternoon because it is the launch of a year-long program of curatorial lectures that will explore the development of the Legion of Honor's collections. These lectures will be delivered by various members of our curatorial staff on the second Saturday of each month at this time at 1 o'clock. And as you'll hear, there are some truly fascinating stories to be told about our collections. While chance has certainly played its part, the development of the Legion of Honor collections has also depended on the largesse and generosity of Bay Area collectors and the canny opportunism and thoughtfulness of our curatorial body. And to start us off, it's my great pleasure to introduce Emily Beeny to tell us more about the history of our collection of European paintings. Emily is the Chief Curator of the Legion of Honor and the Barbara A. Wolfe Curator in charge of European paintings, a specialist in French paintings and drawings of the 17th to 19th centuries, and a special expert on the work of Édouard Manet. She received her PhD from Columbia University in 2016 with a dissertation on Nicolas Poussin, and was awarded the Prix de Rayonnement by the Académie Française in 2021 for her scholarship on French art. Having served in curatorial positions at the Getty Museum, the Norton Simon Museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and the Musée d'Orsay, Emily joined the Fine Art Museums of San Francisco in 2021. And over the last 3 years, she has spearheaded a series of key acquisitions, overseen curatorial planning for the Legion of Honor's Centennial celebration, and served as the presenting curator for Mary Cassatt at Work, the beautiful exhibition in the galleries next door. Emily is currently preparing 2 major exhibition projects for the future. The first, which will appear at the Legion of Honor next fall, a year from now, explores the relationship between 2 key figures at the heart of the Impressionist movement, Édouard Manet and Berthe Morisot. And the second exhibition, scheduled for 2026 and co-organized with the Petit Palais in Paris, will introduce visitors to the Rubens of France, the astounding but often overlooked Baroque French artist, Simon Vouet. So with that, please join me in welcoming Emily to the stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Tom, for that kind introduction. And so many thanks to all of you for being here with us today to celebrate the Legion of Honor's 100th birthday. When you think about it, the Legion is a pretty implausible place. A facsimile of the last... Gosh, is the microphone not working? Okay. Oh gosh, I'm afraid that's not gonna happen because of my height, but I will try to project. A facsimile of the last grand Parisian residence of the Ancien Régime, transposed to a bluff overlooking the Pacific and filled with treasures from the other side of the world. Along with splendid collections of European furniture and porcelain, tapestries and silver, graphic art, and art of the ancient Mediterranean, the Legion today is home to some 800 European paintings, spanning the late medieval period to the Second World War and representing every major national school. The story of collecting European paintings in the city begins, like so many San Francisco stories, with the gold rush, which of course generated both sudden wealth and a desire for beautiful things to spend it on. In the decades immediately following 1849, a circle of enterprising families arriving from England, France, Germany, and the Netherlands opened luxury department stores, mining the miners supplying freshly minted millionaires with the trappings of wealth. Several of these families would go on to form important art collections of their own. For example, descendants of the I. Magnin department store founders have contributed 24 pictures to our collection over the decades, including this sensuous morning scene, painted as if with ice cream by the 18th century French artist Jean-Honoré Fragonard. While descendants of the founders of S&G Gump Company have donated several works, including this graceful Quattrocento Tondo by Jacopo del Solaio. Gump's, whose Market Street location we see here around 1880, actually began as a supplier of carved and gilded frames for mirrors and for pictures, swiftly graduating to the sale of paintings, sculpture, and antique furniture imported from Europe, displayed in sumptuous showrooms like the one pictured here at right. Many an early San Francisco collection got its start at S&G Gump. Heavily populated by recent transplants from Europe, the fledgling city was hungry for art, culture, and news of the continent. Those supplying demand also included American artists working abroad, notably Toby Rosenthal, the son of a San Francisco tailor, who studied painting in Munich, sending back accounts of the European art world that appeared in Bay Area newspapers. And in 1871, this monumental history painting, today in the Art Institute of Chicago, whose first owner was the San Francisco collector, Mrs. Robert C. Johnson. Upon its arrival in town, the death of Elaine was greeted with breathless admiration, shown in a public exhibition attended by 9,000 visitors in just 3 days. You thought our galleries were crowded today. And then stolen by an infamous criminal, William Cutface Donahue, from whom the police eventually recovered it. Here, I think the story of European painting and the Wild West collide in classic early San Francisco fashion. Rosenthal leveraged the resulting celebrity not only to sell his own art, but also to serve as an agent for his friends in Europe, notably the brilliant, short-lived Giovanni Segantini, whose work our collection, as a result, represents in an unusually robust way. Here we see a pungent early still life slated to go on view later this year. Of course, the most serious San Francisco collectors, including Ethel and William Crocker, heir to a Big Four railroad fortune, soon began buying their own paintings, traveling to Paris and New York to secure works by Impressionist and Barbizon painters. These included Jean-François Millet, whose trenchant realist Man with a Hoe, today in the Getty Museum, was by far the most famous painting on the west coast of the United States when it arrived in San Francisco in 1890. William Crocker's mansion, where the Millet hung, like so many that surrounded it on Nob Hill, burned in the fiery aftermath of the 1906 earthquake. How many paintings perished in those flames? Headlines in the New York Times proclaimed, "Man with the Hoe lost," and then, when the picture was miraculously recovered, "Man with the Hoe safe." But the artistic casualties of the fire included a snow scene from Monet's famous Grain Stack series, an indication of the Crockers' forward-looking taste. Here, of course, we see a luckier example from the series at the Hillstead Museum in Connecticut. Because of the fire, among other factors, Ethel and William Crocker's collection, unlike those of their peers in Boston and New York and Philadelphia, would not come to form the basis of the local museum. That task would fall at first to a quite different collector, Michael H. DeYoung. A St. Louis-born newspaperman and founder of the San Francisco Chronicle, DeYoung was inspired by the Columbian Exposition in Chicago to bring a World's Fair to the Bay. Arrayed in Golden Gate Park in 1894, the midway of the California Midwinter International Exposition included at its northeast corner an Egyptianizing building that would be retained after the fair and transformed under DeYoung's patronage into the city's first permanent museum, the M.H. DeYoung Memorial Museum. Its displays were a motley assortment that reflected its founders' wide-ranging interests: taxidermy, furniture and flatware, American art, and anthropological collections, as well as a few European paintings, very much in the taste of Gilded Age San Francisco. De Young liked his pictures big, as you can see from the dimensions of this work, and in 1917 he gave the museum its first European painting, a giant scene of milkmaids at work under a lowering sky, painted by the academic naturalist Julien Dupré, and originally shown at the official state-sponsored Salon exhibition in Paris. 9 years later, de Young's bequest included 2 further pictures, painted in similarly academic style: William Adolphe Bouguereau's Allegory of Lost Innocence, The Broken Pitcher, and Konstantin Makovsky's truly gigantic Russian Bride, which imagines a scene from 17th century Russian life on a canvas more than 9 feet tall. It had figured in the Midwinter Exposition, a loan from the painter, before its consignment to a shady art agent from whom customs officers confiscated it in 1910. De Young bought it in 1916 from the Treasury Department in what amounted to something rather like a police auction. It remains a popular favorite in our galleries today, and you'll notice that here, as with the Bouguereau and the Dupré, I've included the picture's ornate gilded frame, very much in the early Gumps-era San Francisco taste, and clearly an important feature of the painting for its donor. More consequential for the subsequent development of the collection was an endowment de Young bequeathed to the museum upon his death in 1925. The greatest work acquired through this gift was The Tribute Money, an early masterpiece by the 17th century Flemish painter Peter Paul Rubens, and a foundational work for the Old Masters collection. The picture portrays a moment from the book of Matthew when the elders of the temple try to lure Jesus into condemning the payment of taxes to Judea's Roman occupiers, indicating the face of the Roman emperor on a coin with one hand and pointing heavenward with the other. Jesus replies, "Render therefore unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's." The museum director who bought this painting was Walter Heil, a German-born art historian who led the de Young from 1933 to 1961, and also served as director of the Legion of Honor from 1933 to 1939. Here I think it's worth remembering that the early history of our European paintings collection was, of course, divided. The de Young Memorial Museum, here at left, and the California Palace of the Legion of Honor, which opened 30 years later, both collected European paintings almost from the beginning. Especially in the immediate post-war period, one senses a certain competitiveness in the 2 institutions' accumulation of art. Who had the first Rembrandt? Who had the better Boucher? Who had the stronger Old Master or Impressionist holdings? In the end, the European paintings collections, which were merged when the 2 museums joined forces in 1972, benefited hugely from this race between rival institutions. As for the de Young Museum, the concept for the Legion of Honor took root in a World's Fair. In this case, the Panama Pacific International Exhibition, organized in the Marina District to celebrate the opening of the Panama Canal in 1915 and to help San Francisco accelerate its recovery from the earthquake and fire. The French pavilion of the fair, here at lower right, was a 3/4 scale reproduction of the Palais de Salmes, a Parisian hôtel particulier erected on the left bank in the 1780s and later transformed by Napoleon into the headquarters for his new Order of Merit, the Légion d'honneur. One visitor particularly enchanted by the French pavilion was Alma de Bretteville-Spreckels, wife of the Hawaiian sugar baron, Adolphe Spreckels. Known for her stately height as Big Alma, this artist's model turned society leader had great ambitions for her native city. Acquiring several sculptures by Auguste Rodin that had formed the centerpiece of the French pavilion display, Alma declared the building should be transformed into a permanent museum, the city's first solely dedicated to fine art. You can hear much more about this story on Monday at my colleague Isabella Lores-Chavez's lecture on the history of the Legion of Honor. For our purposes, though, suffice it to say that the fairground building was made of temporary materials, essentially paper mache, and so Alma set out to erect a new and permanent version 4 miles away at Land's End. A project that would take nearly a decade to realize, but that would result in the building whose 100th birthday we're celebrating today. Of course, Alma's chief passion was for sculpture, all those wonderful Rodins, and the handful of paintings on view when the museum finally opened its doors in 1924 were loans. If she wasn't much of a paintings collector, though, Alma was an excellent collector of people, enlisting several key partners in the effort to build out a collection of European pictures. One such partner was Archer Huntington, who came from a great family of California collectors and had founded the Hispanic Society of America in New York in 1904. He was also the husband of the American sculptor Anna Hyatt Huntington, whose El Cid and Joan of Arc stand sentry at the entrance of the Legion today. Huntington's gifts from his own collection consisted primarily of 18th century French decorative art and a sizable collection of portrait miniatures, as well as a likeness of his indomitable mother, Arabella Huntington, wearing her signature spectacles by the academic painter Alexandre Cabanel. More importantly for the European paintings collection, Huntington also endowed a purchase fund used to acquire a key group of paintings by artists including Jacopo Tintoretto, Nicolas de Largillière, Jean-Honoré Fragonard, and Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot, whose fresh, early view of Rome is the most important picture acquired through the Huntington gift. It was painted quickly, wet into wet, on a little sheet of paper in 1826. A neat hole in the lower left-hand corner marks the spot where Corot pinned it to his drawing board, sitting on the muddy riverbank and marveling at the play of light on the Tiber, the bridge, the Castel Sant'Angelo. Another of Alma's recruits was a committed collector of paintings. Mildred Anna Williams was born Mildred McQuillian into a modest family in Vallejo, California. Seen here in a circa 1900 portrait by François Flamagne in our collection, Millie, as friends knew her, was beautiful and vivacious. She pursued a career on the stage in New York, there befriending the industrialist and legendary collector Henry Clay Frick, who may have planted the seed for her own future collection. Widowed at an early age, Millie married Henry K.S. Williams, scion of a wholesale lumber fortune. Together they settled in Paris, buying an elegant house in the Avenue Foch and proceeding to fill it with pictures, tapestry, and antique furniture. The collection, acquired chiefly through Knoedler Gallery, was rich in works by the Barbizon school of Diaz, de Beeny, and again, Corot, whose silvery light effects and mood of quiet reverie held special appeal for the couple. Their more contemporary holdings included this late work by Camille Pissarro, depicting the bustling quayside at Dieppe under a gray sky. It would become the first Impressionist picture to enter the collection of the Legion of Honor. Befriending Mr. and Mrs. Williams during an extended stay in Paris, Alma persuaded them to promise the whole collection to her new museum in California upon Millie's death. This came to pass in 1939. With France on the brink of war, the moment could scarcely have been trickier, for Millie's will stipulated the immediate transfer of the whole collection to San Francisco. By this time, Walter Heil's term as director of the Legion had concluded, and a young American curator and art historian, Thomas Carr Howe, had stepped into his shoes. Arranging shipments through the port of Marseille, Howe achieved the diplomatic feat of evacuating everything, 99 odd paintings. Here we see just a small selection, as well as sculpture and decorative arts objects, ahead of advancing German troops. These works came to form the core of the Legion's original European paintings collection. The widowed Henry Williams followed his pictures to San Francisco, making daily visits to the Legion of Honor for the rest of his life, and working with Howe to continue building the collection. Among the most important works thus acquired was Thomas Gainsborough's portrait of Mrs. Maria Fitzherbert, painted in a spontaneous sketch-like style, the year after the sitter contracted a secret marriage with the Prince of Wales in 1785. The relationship between the prince and Fitzherbert, a widowed Catholic, was a public scandal, forbidden by the Church of England, and may or may not have reminded the WASP Prince Williams of early stages in his own courtship with the pretty young Irish-American widow, Millie. Upon his death in 1944, Williams bequeathed to the Legion significant funds to build on the couple's collecting legacy. Thomas Carr Howe's judicious use of these funds over the next quarter century had much to do with how he spent the final year of the war. In May 1945, Howe left his post as director of the Legion and reported for duty at Versailles as a lieutenant in the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives Section Unit, the elite corps of Allied arts experts known as the Monuments Men, convened to initiate the restitution of Nazi-looted art. Among Howe's first assignments was the cataloging and packing of several thousand works of art stashed by German forces in an Austrian salt mine. Here we see the entrance to that mine at upper right and the storage system within it as the Monuments Men began their cataloging work. The art recovered had been stolen from Jewish families, as well as from public museums and houses of worship across the continent. Discoveries included Michelangelo's Bruges Madonna, Vermeer's Artist Studio, and most famously, the Ghent altarpiece of Jan van Eyck, pictured here. Howe's next assignment took him to the Neue Schwanstein, the remote Bavarian castle where Nazi administrators had kept careful records of artwork seized. Reunited with recovered objects at the Allies' central collecting point in Munich, these documents helped guide the complex project of restitution. So how does this all relate to the history of our collection? Among the works recovered at the salt mine by Howe and his colleagues were these 4 strange, enchanting scenes of toddlers doing untoddler-like things. Painted in about 1752 by Carl van Loo for the royal mistress, Madame de Pompadour. They offer allegories of the arts: painting, sculpture, music, and architecture. All cast as the children of the Pompadour, a great patroness of the arts. Her chateau, where these 4 pictures once hung, appears here in an elevation presented by the Wee architects, the Château de Bellevue. Seized from the Viennese branch of the Rothschild banking family, these pictures had been designated for a planned Führer Museum at Linz, according to a Nazi inventory recovered by Howe and his colleagues. A note card for architecture from the Munich Central Collecting Point bears the inventory number still visible in blue chalk on the back of our painting stretcher. Restituted to the Rothschild family, the paintings were sold in 1950 via the New York gallery Rosenberg and Stiebel to Thomas Carr Howe, who had returned to his post as director of the Legion in 1946. Van Loo's Little Architects would enjoy a brief star turn a few years later in Alfred Hitchcock's iconic 1958 film Vertigo, which features a couple of scenes shot in Gallery 6 at the Legion, today the George and Marie Heckscher Gallery. Here we see the Van Loo in the still at left, just behind Jimmy Stewart. Of course, the more central painting for Hitchcock's story is the portrait of Carlotta, seen here at right, the object of Kim Novak's rapt attention. And I think it's worth pointing out here that this is a lurid creation of a Hollywood set designer, temporarily hung for the film shoot, and has never been part of our collection. The Van Loos belonged to a substantial corpus of 18th century French pictures that Howe and his colleagues acquired through the Williams Endowment from the Rothschild collection via Rosenberg and Stiebel and from various other sources. But Howe also made use of the same resource for a quite different purpose. Between the 1940s and 1970s, building on Mildred and Henry Williams's harbor scene by Pissarro, the museum actively pursued French Impressionist paintings, adding Auguste Renoir's glimmering, iridescent landscape at Beaulieu in 1944, and Edgar Degas' bracing, sketchy musicians in the orchestra in 1952, Édouard Manet's richly ambiguous At the Milliners in 1957, and Claude Monet's late reflective Water Lilies in 1971. Paul Cézanne's forest interior, redolent of warm rock and pine needles, was among the last pictures so acquired, arriving at the Legion in 1977. The Williams Fund was essentially exhausted in pursuit of these paintings, but of course, had the museum failed to acquire them before the 1980s, a booming art market would have carried such works out of reach. This string of acquisitions also encouraged local collectors to contribute individual Impressionist works to the Legion's growing collection. Our Monet holdings offer the key example. The artist's vaporous 1906 view of the domes of Santa Maria della Salute from across the Grand Canal arrived in 1960, gift of Osgood Hooker. It was followed in 1962 by this fresh, spontaneous early work, an 1874 scene of sailboats on the Seine, a gift of Bruno and Sadie Adriani. In 1970 followed this brisk, calligraphic seascape, painted in 1881, which belonged to a series of Impressionist gifts from the collection of Prentice Cobb Hale. Setting an example for San Franciscans interested in French paintings, the Williamses helped lay the groundwork for the most beloved area of our collection today. Of course, a parallel project was taking shape in Golden Gate Park. If Mildred and Henry Williams had served as fairy godparents for the Legion, Margaret and Roscoe Oakes, seen here, fulfilled a similar role for the DeYoung. Mr. Oakes had made his money in mining, working as an executive in the Union Carbide Company and eventually owning a network of drilling operations in Southern California. He and his wife became interested in collecting after the Second World War, and with the guidance of Walter Heil, swiftly built one of the most important private collections of old master paintings on the West Coast. Stars included a tiny, jewel-like Virgin and Child attributed to the early Netherlandish master Dirk Bouts, treated with extraordinary tenderness and rapt attention to detail. Note the gleaming pearls in the Virgin's crown, the shimmering gold threads in the cloth of honor behind her. This little panel exemplifies the new naturalism and humanism of early Renaissance art in the North. On an utterly different scale, the Oakeses acquired grand manner portraits by the 18th century British chef d'école Joshua Reynolds, and by the 17th century Flemish master he most revered. Antony van Dyck's portrait of the Duchess of Havre with her son belonged to a particularly strong contingent of Baroque paintings acquired by Mr. and Mrs. Oakes. Others included an austere, theatrical Old Man and Old Woman by Georges de la Tour, and of course, Rembrandt's portrait of the innkeeper and civic guardsman Joris de Calerai, an astonishing life-likeness captured shortly after the young artist moved to Amsterdam. Appearing as a long-term loan at the DeYoung from the 1950s onwards and bequeathed to the museum by Mr. Oakes upon his death in 1964, this painting is today the only Rembrandt in a public collection in Northern California. It was, however, not the first attempt to add a picture from the master's hand to a San Francisco museum collection. In 1948, with much fanfare, Thomas Carr Howe and Alma Spreckels unveiled another painting at the Legion of Honor. It was then believed to be the portrait of a rabbi by Rembrandt. Its presence at Land's End surely helped drive the subsequent competitive acquisition of Joris de Calerai's portrait for the museum in Golden Gate Park. The Legion picture would make headlines, though, for grimmer reasons in 1978. It was one of 4 Dutch pictures stolen on Christmas Eve by thieves who broke into the gallery via a skylight in a sinister reverse Santa Claus operation. Recovered more than 20 years later, when it and 2 other stolen works appeared on the doorstep of Doyle's auction house in New York, the painting was exhibited briefly, but soon disattributed. Attentive technical and art historical study suggests that this work is neither a Rembrandt nor the portrait of a rabbi, but rather a period picture of high quality, painted by an artist working under the Dutch master's influence. More even than Mr. and Mrs. Oakes, the figure who changed the face of the museum's Old Master collection was Samuel H. Kress, who had no personal connection to San Francisco. A Pennsylvania-born retail magnate of the interwar period, Kress built a chain of over 200 variety stores, essentially 5 and dimes, housed in elegant Art Deco buildings and serving most every major city in the United States. Here we see the New York flagship store, but the Bay Area alone boasted locations in San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, Richmond, and Santa Rosa. Kress plowed the proceeds into a truly enormous collection, over 3,000 works of art, with overwhelming strength in Italian Renaissance painting and sculpture. Kress lived amidst masterpieces by Titian and Raphael, Fra Angelico and Botticelli in an elegant apartment on Fifth Avenue. But rather than start his own museum in the manner of Henry Clay Frick or J.P. Morgan, he joined forces with others in the project to create a national gallery for the American people in Washington, D.C. The gallery opened its doors in 1941, and following Kress's death 14 years later, received his entire collection, with the understanding that curators in Washington would sift through and select the works they wished to exhibit, allowing the vast remainder to be distributed to several dozen museums in cities across the country. Here we see a map where those institutions are located. Museums selected were all in cities or regions where Kress had operated his dime stores. With so many Bay Area locations, the people of San Francisco had been good to Kress. The de Young Museum was allotted 39 paintings of outstanding quality. The most important contributions were in early Italian painting. Today we have in our collection 11 14th and 15th century Italian pictures from the Kress gift, including this glittering, exquisitely preserved St. Catherine from a polyptych by the Florentine master Bernardo Daddi, and this tiny, exquisite predella panel by Fra Angelico, where St. Dominic greets the barefoot mendicant St. Francis. On a very much grander scale, the Kress gift included two monumental 16th century altarpieces that now anchor our Renaissance galleries. Painted by Raffaellino del Garbo in costly jewel tones, this scene of the Virgin and Child with Saints Jerome and Bartholomew originally graced the chapel of the Frescobaldi family in the Church of San Spirito in Florence. Drawing on the recent innovations of Leonardo in Milan and Raphael in Rome, Cesare da Sesto created this altarpiece for the Oratory of San Giorgio, a chapel for Genoese expatriates in Messina, Sicily. Flanking the Virgin and Child, we find the patron saints of Genoa, John the Baptist and George, a knight in shining armor. The Kress gift reached beyond the Italian Renaissance, though, adding to the collection a small but excellent group of Spanish pictures. Here we see El Greco's St. Francis in Prayer, no doubt selected for San Francisco as an image of the city's patron saint, as well as a group of 17th century Dutch works, including this windswept river view by Salomon van Roystal, and one notable 18th century Italian picture, the fresh, joyous Triumph of Flora by Giambattista Tiepolo, a true masterpiece of the collection. Surrounding her chariot with tumbling cherubs and dancing nymphs, Tiepolo cast the Roman goddess of flowers and spring as a slightly bored Venetian courtesan. On the subject of dancing nymphs, and perhaps courtesans, the last great collection gift to the de Young Museum before it merged with the Legion of Honor was that of Gyula Hanley, a Hungarian-born belly dancer, and her rather more bookish husband, Edward Hanley, here at center. Dr. Hanley, a physician, had inherited a modest brick manufacturing fortune, which he invested wisely and used to build a substantial collection of avant-garde art of the 19th and early 20th century at his home in Bradford, Pennsylvania. He and his future wife met in 1945 at a Buffalo nightclub. Gyula later remarked of her husband, "I'm the only ostentatious thing he ever owned." But Dr. Hanley's collection ultimately comprised over 200 paintings, sculptures, and works on paper. Its 56 oil paintings included this sensuous nude, Venus by Pierre-Paul Prudhon, as well as Manet's stark, realist Head of Christ, and Matisse's brightly dressed, hollow-eyed young woman in pink. In 1968, Gyula Hanley spearheaded a touring exhibition of the collection, often lecturing, or indeed dancing, in the galleries where it appeared. The results were not to everyone's taste, but she evidently established a friendly rapport with Ian McKibben White, then director of the de Young Museum, where the collection toured, and following her husband's death, Gyula donated the largest group of artworks to the de Young, remarking that she had picked San Francisco because people were so nice to me there. At a gala to celebrate the donation, Gyula reportedly performed with a troupe of young dancers clad only in body paint and offered the San Francisco mayor, Joseph Eliotto, a private belly dance. In 1972, the Legion and the de Young merged, making two collections one. Over the course of the next half-century, the collection has continued to grow through gifts, bequests, and purchases. A number of estate gifts have enriched the shared collection with substantial groups of pictures. For example, the 1988 bequest of Whitney Warren Jr., seen here with his yellow lab and his collection at home on Telegraph Hill. Among other works, this gift brought to the museum paintings by artists including Henri Fontaine-Latour, Giovanni Boldini, and perhaps most importantly, John Constable, whose windswept view of Hampstead Heath we see here. In 1998, Dora Ide, heiress to a Pennsylvania steel fortune who had settled in Pacific Heights following her husband's death, quietly willed a distinguished group of pictures to the museum, including this trompe-l'oeil painting of a terracotta relief by Louis Léopold Boilly. In 2008, the bequest of a San Francisco Society leader, Marilyn Postley, completed a distinguished gift of 18th century French paintings that she and her late husband, Clarence, had collected over the course of their marriage. Here we see an iridescent landscape by Jean-Baptiste Pimont. In 2013, a gift from the estate of Diana Dollar Knowles, heiress to a shipping fortune, and another grande dame of San Francisco society, brought to the collection paintings including this view of sunflowers on the Seine by the Impressionist Gustave Caillebotte. Other collectors have actually removed pictures from their own walls during their lifetimes to share with our public. For example, the paintings donated over the years by Deborah and Joseph Goldine, a practicing artist whose work is widely collected in North American museums. This dramatic scene, painted on slate, is perhaps the most spectacular. It joined our collection in 2003. Portraying the attempted seduction of the biblical hero Joseph by the wife of the king, Alessandro Turchi, known as L'Orbetto, made use of the bare stone to conjure darkness that threatens to swallow the figures whole. Painted on a similarly intimate scale and precious support, in this case copper, Carlo Dolci's pensive St. Julian, a gift from the eminent Russian hill collector Phoebe Coles, came to the museums in 2014. Further gifts from the Coles collection have included this rapt, austere still life of seashells by the 17th century French painter Jacques Linard. Shells were Linard's great specialty. Gathered from distant corners of the globe, exotic specimens were avidly collected in early modern Europe as wonders of the natural world. For the still life painter, their complex structures and surfaces offered infinite challenges: freckled, spiny exteriors, and slick, nacreous recesses. Linard arrayed them in pared-down compositions and painted them with a rapt attention that enlists our own in the looking. Observe the artist's signature, J. Linard, seemingly carved into the side of the box at right above the dark ruffled lip of a murex shell. This painting belongs to a group of works donated in the course of our ongoing Centennial Gifts of Art campaign, an effort spanning the museum's collections to build for our next 100 years. In the little time we have remaining today, I'd like to share just a few of these works in a bit more detail. The public effort began in spectacular fashion with a gift from Chairwoman Emerita Diane B. Wilsey, a painting snatched from the auction block on the eve of the first Anne and Gordon Getty collection sale in the fall of 2022. Giovanni Antonio Canal, called Canaletto, was the greatest Venetian view painter of the 18th century. This picture offers one of his most iconic vedute. Bathed in the late afternoon light, Canaletto's composition looks eastward along the Grand Canal, past the stately church of Santa Maria della Salute, which looks much the same in a recent photograph here at right. For all its topographical precision, though, the picture was not painted in Venice, but rather in London, on the basis of a print after an earlier work by the same artist. Canaletto had moved to London in 1746 to capitalize on a ready market for his work among British collectors who had first encountered it during youthful grand tour adventures in Italy. One such collector was William Holbach, owner of Farnborough Hall in Warwickshire. Upon coming into his inheritance, Holbach set out to redecorate this country house, creating in its dining room a kind of grand tour in microcosm, 4 Venetian views by Canaletto and 2 Roman views by Panini. A photograph of the room today, now decorated with modern copies, gives a sense of the picture's original setting and its original function, but for both artist and patron, as a souvenir of La Serenissima, a picture about missing Venice. Acquired at the Getty sale, thanks to the generosity of an anonymous donor, this intimate late work by the Impressionist painter Camille Pissarro is another exciting new addition, offering a glimpse of the artist's domestic life. Jeanne Pissarro, the artist's only surviving daughter, aged 18, sits in the living room of a rented apartment in Paris, absorbed in her reading. Shades of red in the furniture and carpet. The cover of Jeanne's book, the flush in her cheeks, give the composition its extraordinary warmth, while unseen windows at right bathe it in soft, wintry light. Those unseen windows looked out on the Tuileries Gardens and the Louvre. Were Jeanne to look up from her book and turn her head, this is what she would have seen out that window, a view that Pissarro watched change through the seasons, painting it over and over from 1899 to 1900. One such view, in fact, hangs unframed on the wall behind Jeanne in our picture, a reminder of the seamless integration of her father's work and life. Brought to us through the generosity of Alan Templeton, an Oakland-based art historian, collector, and philanthropist, this radiant neoclassical portrait by Anne-Louise Giraudet de Roussy-Triozon depicts Augustine Berthe, an intellectually sophisticated salon hostess and wife of a newspaper publisher. She appears at the age of about 25 in a gown of black velvet with a delicate lace Medici collar, fashionable under the reign of Napoleon Bonaparte. Unlined and virtually untouched, indeed still wearing its original frame, this painting is in marvelously fine condition. Though painted over 200 years ago, it retains all the delicate glazes that convey the sitter's glowing complexion and elegant ensemble. Eyes glisten, pearls gleam, every surface convinces us of its specific texture. The painting is signed with Giraudet's monogram and dated in the lower left-hand corner, where the sitter's untied glove offers a glimpse of bare arm. In homage to Augustine's beauty, Giraudet thrust a hairpin through her dark curls, decorated with a tiny ivory Venus, Roman goddess of love and beauty. In addition to these individual gifts, our Centennial campaign has brought in two major paintings acquisitions achieved through larger group efforts. Both are works of art by women. Psyche bidding her family farewell was the first history painting by a woman shown at the Paris Salon in 1791. Its author, Marie-Guillemine Benoit, imagined an ancient myth from a fresh perspective. Turning away from the more familiar final chapter of the Psyche story, her romance with Cupid, a handy pretext for the depiction of graceful nude for her male colleagues, to focus on a scene of family separation and female sacrifice. Weeping in her mother's arms, Psyche, dressed in white, prepares to meet her fate. According to a prophecy, she is doomed to marry a monster and must be sacrificed to save the kingdom of her father, who bends his head in woe. Benoit was a rare female pupil of the great neoclassical painter Jacques-Louis David, who afforded her training as a history painter, that is, as a painter of scenes from myth, literature, history, the Bible, as opposed to portraiture and still life, more common artistic terrain for women who were imagined to lack the imaginative powers required for the higher genres. Benoit plainly proved the doubters wrong, though some skeptical critics wondered when they saw this picture at the Salon in 1791 whether a woman could really have painted it. Now the earliest painting by a woman in our collection. This portrait by Lavinia Fontana opens a window onto family life at the dawn of the 17th century. A wildly successful portraitist who began her career in Bologna before moving to Rome, Fontana was renowned both for her loving descriptions of costumes and jewelry and for her sympathetic portrayals of women and children. Dressed in blinding splendor, lace and velvet, gold and pearls, Fontana's principal subject in this portrait appears with 6 of her children. A grave little Diane Arbus-esque trio at left, a squirmier group at right. Their mother can be identified thanks to an inscription at the top of the canvas as Bianca degli Utili Mazelli. An epitaph on her tomb at the church of San Lorenzo da Mazza identifies her as a Florentine lady who married a Roman nobleman and bore him 19 children before dying at 37 from complications of childbirth. Fontana was no stranger to large families. She herself bore 11 children, the majority of whom did not survive into adulthood, and the 6 she painted here were probably Bianca's, only 6 still living at the time. Though we do not know all of their names, the artist offered clues to her sitters' personalities. Each holds an accessory of some kind, a quill pen and inkwell, a silver dish of figs, a faithful puppy, and so on. Each of these surely carried emblematic meaning related to the salient virtues of the corresponding family member: studiousness, sweetness, fidelity, and so on. Just one child, the toddler clutching her mother's forefinger, is identified by name. An inscription over her head reads, Virginia. Virginia Mazzelli was among Bianca's children who survived into adulthood. Married in 1620, she bore a daughter who married in turn into the Marchetti family, with whom the picture remained until 1990. How fitting that this portrait of a matriarch, by a matriarch, should have descended through the daughter's line. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that when the Legion of Honor first opened its doors in 1924, all the paintings on view were loans. There was, however, one important exception: the largest painting in our collection today, which graces the ceiling of this theater. A flowery neo-Rococo fantasy by the now forgotten Spanish painter Julio Villa y Prades, active primarily in Argentina, a friend and collaborator of the rather more famous Joaquin Sorolla. Sorolla had completed a great series of mural decorations for Archer Huntington's Hispanic Society Museum in New York, and may have recommended Villa, through Huntington, for the Legion project. His slightly chocolate box allegories include fate, blindfolded and barely restraining 2 winged horses, the arts, music, literature, dance, and crucially painting, brush and palette in hand, amidst a lush California garden. California herself, holding aloft a flag decorated with the grizzly bear and presiding over a grove of orange trees and grapevine. At the center of the ceiling, 3 graces bear aloft the limp body of a young man, the apotheosis of the California soldier, as Villa titled this work. Do take a look up when we bring up the lights. The ceiling offers a reminder of the Legion's original dual purpose, both as an art museum and as a monument to the 3,600 Californians who perished in France during the First World War. This is why the building opened its doors in 1924 on November 11th, Armistice Day, and this is why the Legion has served ever since as a place of both delight and solace. 100 years later, we remain in need of both. Thank you for your attention. I would be so happy to entertain questions if you have any, and maybe we can bring up the lights a little so people can start looking at the ceiling. I think if you can just be patient for just a minute as the microphones come round and as we, yeah, hooray, check it out. Was there maybe a question in here or, oh, just pointing at the ceiling maybe. Great, a question right here. Here comes the mic.
Thank you. Yes, the sculptures on the back of the building, the Greek gods and goddesses, who made them? Do we know which gods and goddesses they are? I mean, some of them are easy to identify, but
so the busts that go round the back or the full-scale figures?
The full-scale sculptures.
So both are reproduced after models that are actually on the Palais de Salm in Paris. And some of them are after the antique, after antique models. But the great sculptor involved in the overall program for the Palais de Salm was called Moat. He is the one who was responsible for the beautiful reliefs, of which we have copies on our building. The cool thing about the copy of the main one at the front of our building, which is a sort of triumph of series kind of idea, is that it folds outward so that the organ, because this building is also a musical instrument, there's an organ that's sort of built into this building. And so when that relief gets lifted, the organ can kind of blast into the court of honor, which I think we'll have an opportunity to hear later today. It's very exciting to hear. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Looks like there's maybe another question over here. Oh, I think we're set. Thanks, Isabella.
Hi, I just have a question. Are you going to rehang Pomona?
Sorry, are we going to rehang what?
The painting Pomona?
The Vertumnus and Pomona of Boucher. So the question is whether we're going to rehang this wonderful 18th century picture. Yeah, we absolutely are. So this is a painting that's been undergoing a multi-year conservation treatment that generally anchors our 18th century gallery. But it's a major treatment that's also involved a lot of technical study and that's been facilitated by a very serious grant from the Getty and the Conserving Canvas project. One of the things that we've discovered about this painting is that it wasn't actually intended as a gallery picture at all. It was the cartoon for a tapestry cut into slices and slid under the looms at Beauvais to weave a tapestry. And then only sort of Frankensteined back together in the 19th century to turn it into initially an architectural decoration and later a gallery painting. We plan to put it on view this spring. And at that time, Elise Effman Clifford, our head of paintings conservation, and I will give a talk about the many lives of this painting and the extraordinary treatment she's overseen. Great question. Looks like maybe we have a question back here. Isabella, I think just to your left, yeah.
Thank you, Emily, for that wonderful lecture. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'm wondering if, say something happens to the building, which piece of artwork will you run to save?
Well, obviously, that's a very unfair question. We were just talking about this a bit earlier because, it's like asking somebody to choose a child a little bit. But, I feel like if you're going to play this game, it has to be something that's portable, right? So I think the little Fragonard with which the lecture sort of began, this sort of erotic picture of the 1780s, love that painting. And I could just boost it right off the wall. So I think that's my pick.
Hi, Emily. Thank you for this amazing talk. Very quick question. We saw a lot of the paintings that are not yet hanging in the galleries. Will you be changing the paintings over the 1 year of this amazing celebration?
So that's a great question. We've recently reinstalled the 2 Baroque galleries. So this has been a big sort of long-term partnership project between Isabel Orez-Chavez, Jeff Raymond, our sculpture curator, and myself. And, it's involved bringing some things out of storage. It's involved conservation treatments. It's involved bringing in loans and also showcasing one new acquisition. It also involved getting rid of the purple in that gallery, which we're pretty happy about. And those are kind of the first case of a series of reinstallations that will unfold over the course of the Centennial year. I think the biggest changes you're likely to see will be in the 19th century galleries, where we're hoping to introduce a salon hang that will allow us to accommodate some of the later 19th century things that are not currently on view. Please. Was the ceiling done in situ? The ceiling was done in situ. That's my understanding of it. I think I certainly have much more learning to do about the ceiling and how it actually unfolded. But yes, it's my understanding that he actually is in residence over a period of many months to achieve this. So it's different from like Puvis Chevan's murals for the Boston Public Library or something like that that get painted on canvas, rolled up, and sent across the sea. Yeah. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you so much for your attention. And please, after maybe taking a little break, come back in here at 2:30, correct? For what's sure to be a super engaging conversation between Amélie Simier, director of the Rodin Museum, and Tom Campbell about Rodin in San Francisco.